Hi folks, this is Abel James, and thank you so much for listening to Fat Burning Man, where we talk about real food and real results. Today's throwback episode is with Dr. David Perlmutter, and he is, of course, the author of the international bestseller Grain Brain, one heck of a book that tells us that our wheat has in fact changed, and what's in our bagels and muffins and cereals and breads and the rest of it is not the same stuff that our grandparents were once eating. So this is a really cool show. It was recorded not too long ago, so I really hope you enjoy it. Now, an update from the road. I finally made it to Los Angeles, or the Los Angeles area. I'm in an orchard right now, and we have, grapefruit, orange, lime, and other assorted citrus that it's right out the window. It's a beautiful day, and I hope it's a beautiful day where you are too. Okay, so on to the show with Dr. David Perlmutter. We're going to be talking about how eating fat actually fuels your brain, why today's grains are not in any way similar to the ones that we ate in days past. You're also going to find out why eating fat makes you smart, how carbs made us sick and overweight, and if that's not enough, David's going to tell you 2 things you can do right now to actually regrow your own brain cells. Pretty cool. All right, let's go hang out with Dr. David Perlmutter. All right, folks, Dr. David Perlmutter is a board-certified neurologist and the author of the terrifically titled #1 New York Times bestseller Grain Brain, The Surprising Truth About Wheat, Carbs, and Sugar, Your Brain's Silent Killers. How's it going, David?
It's going great, Abel. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited you're here, and I'm even more excited about the guitar behind you. So, but right before this call, it was kind of awesome. We were talking about what kind of music each one of us plays, and I think after we hang up this call, we're probably going to do a little jamming. I'm going to play some rhythm. You can rock the lead. So I would love to start. There are so many things to talk about. Your book, Grain Brain, is brilliant. A lot of my listeners have actually asked for you by name, and they're just like, when is he going to come on the show? So I'm really glad. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're busy.
I'm delighted. Absolutely.
But let's talk about how there's tremendous power in what you have to say, and in the sense that you can literally change the way that your brain works based upon what you eat. So can you just riff on that a little bit?
So, the brain is a very energy dependent organ. 25% of all your basal energy expenditure when you're at rest is consumed by this highly metabolic organ called your brain. And that's actually a good thing. And I think as we get started, we should ask, what is the fuel that we're using to power the brain? And what we now understand is, we all grew up with this notion in healthcare that the brain loves glucose and requires glucose to be powered and for its energy demand. And the reality is nothing is further from the truth. The brain actually thrives when it is shifted to burning fat, a process called keto adaptation. And it works beautifully to the extent that even now, when we recognize that in Alzheimer's disease, it's primarily an energy utilization deficiency disease, that here there is, in the United States, the FDA has approved a medical food which basically fills in the gaps, powers the brain with ketones, with fats, and that's available now by prescription. So it looks like the pharmaceutical industry, and I'm nothing derogatory here, has jumped on board in recognizing finally that the brain really is powered beautifully, far more efficiently, and with a reduced rate of free radical production when it utilizes primarily fat as a fuel source, as opposed to burning carbohydrates and specifically glucose. So that notion of the brain having a preference for fuel right off the bat is kind of odd.
Yeah.
But the idea that the brain requires glucose, meaning that we require carbohydrate in our diet, is really felonious.
Yeah. I feel like there's a growing acceptance for that fact, especially in certain circles, but when did that really start to come out in the literature?
Well, in the literature, probably at least 15 years ago. I mean, by researchers like Dr. Mark Mattson and others who have recognized that, in fact, fat is a superfuel for the brain, that things like beta hydroxybutyrate, which is formed through the process of beta oxidation of fatty acids in the liver, provides an incredibly powerful fuel source for the brain to the extent that the brain functions far more efficiently and even allows its mitochondria to replicate new and better mitochondria to share the load of energy production, is really kind of an exciting new paradigm, again, the past decade or so. But beyond that, when you're on this type of diet, a ketogenic diet, some other very important things happen. Beyond just allowing the mitochondria to produce energy, ATP molecules, more efficiently, this diet, ketogenic diet, leads to what we call mitochondrial biogenesis, meaning the growth of new mitochondria. And who couldn't use more mitochondria to carry the load?
Yeah.
But in addition, we now understand that we've got to really nurture our mitochondria. The mitochondria, aside from their role in energy purveyance for the brain cells, actually function to dictate, in some regard, the function of the nuclear DNA, not the mitochondrial DNA, but the mitochondria influence the expression of the DNA found in the cell's nucleus. And specifically, the mitochondria are involved in the activity of the DNA that dictates, frankly, whether the cell will live or die. When the mitochondria are healthy, then the cell doesn't undergo a process called apoptosis. When mitochondria are challenged and there is deficiency of energy production, then the mitochondria signal the genome to produce certain enzymes, ultimately activating a pathway using what are called the caspase enzymes. And that tells the cell that it needs to commit suicide, basically, and leads to cell death. And you really don't want to have cell death happening in your brain, losing brain cells. I mean, Lord knows, going through our teens and our 20s, we did enough of that. Brain cells. We don't need to keep doing that. Fortunately, we can grow back new brain cells, which brings me to another point. And that is, when you're ketotic and producing that environment, it also activates the genes that code for the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. And I'd really like your viewers and listeners to look up BDNF. That's Bravo, Delta, November, Foxtrot, epimonically. And that said, that is really like growth hormone for the brain. It strengthens neurons, it makes them resilient, it makes them resistant to damage, and perhaps most importantly, BDNF triggers the brain to actually grow new brain cells, a process called neurogenesis. Beyond that, the ketogenic diet reduces the production of inflammatory mediators, with the recognition that inflammation is really the cornerstone of some of our most dreaded neurologic conditions, including Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, etc. So the shift of nutrition of the brain away from a carbohydrate-based protocol to one that embraces the beauty of fat is really a revolutionary new paradigm. It's only what the type of diet humans have been eating for a couple of million years, so it's really brand new.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
That's the short answer to your question.
So the way that I understand it then is, we've been following the advice that we need to eat lots of glucose to fuel our brains, which is the exact opposite of what we should have been doing all along.
Well, we've never been on that diet. I mean, here we are, for 99.9% of our time on this planet, we've been on a gluten-free, low-carb, high-fat diet. And now all of a sudden, since 1992, when the government says we should all be cutting out fat and eating more carbs, who gave us that information? It really came from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, whose job it is to sell more grain.
Yeah.
So, and corn, where high fructose corn syrup comes from. It's the death of us. Since 1992, 10 years later, the rates of diabetes in America went up threefold when we cut out fat and substituted these ridiculous carbohydrates for the healthful, wonderful fats that we have been consuming for a couple of million years. Now we're going to do better because the U.S. Department of Agriculture tells us so, and then we see what are the health consequences. And the reason I stress the diabetes part is because when you become a type 2 diabetic, which is diet-induced diabetes, you've doubled your risk for becoming an Alzheimer's patient, a disease for which there is no treatment. Becoming an Alzheimer's patient, then, being related to diabetes, being related to your diet, therefore draws this connection between the food that you eat and risk for becoming demented. And that's a very powerful connection.
Yeah. So when people hear about this, it's one thing to understand it intellectually, but what does it look like? Could you follow the path of someone who eats in a fat adapted state over the course of their lifetime compared to someone who eats basically fueling their brain with carbs over the course of their lifetime?
Well, if you want to see what it looks like to fuel your brain with carbs or fuel your entire body with carbohydrates, you have to go no further than your nearest airport. So the next time you take a trip and you're waiting for your flight, just watch the people passing by. And they always seem to pass by under a sign that says terminal at the airport. And that to me really just so well characterizes Americans are in awful condition, awful shape. The physiology of Americans is absolutely dreadful. We're being crippled economically by the healthcare dollars that are being expended for the diseases that are caused by our maladaptive dietary choices that are coming from what we are being told to eat.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, there's this big debate right now about the healthcare initiative, the Affordable Care Act. And the reality is that as far as being a healthcare initiative, it has absolutely nothing to do with health. It's all about what to do when people get sick.
Yeah.
Will they have insurance that will cover their illnesses and their hospitalizations, et cetera? Now, that's very honorable and very meaningful. But the point is, it does nothing to keep you healthy in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts with the food that you eat. And the idea that your food can influence your health, that's brand new as well. That was just published by Dr. Hippocrates just 2,000 years ago. So, in the PBS special, I mentioned before we did this interview that I've been going around the country doing a PBS special. And I start off that special with a picture of my dog. And people are going, is this random? Where did this come from? And I explained that, our dog was sick. He was losing his fur. We took him to the vet. And the first question that she asked us was, what are you feeding your dog? Mm-hmm. And we responded, no big deal. And I was thinking two things. Number one, if that was the first question your doctor were to ask you, number one, you'd be surprised. Number two, you'd be probably offended. Mm-hmm. I mean, my goodness, I just want you to give me a prescription for something so I can go home. And the other thing is, we totally think that's cool with respect to our pets. The first question the vet says, what are you feeding your animal? We answer because obviously it's very, very important. Mm-hmm. Why is it not important for you and me?
Isn't that such an interesting disconnect? And a similar thing happens when people will go out and walk their dog, but they won't, if they don't have a dog, go outside at all.
Right. We have tried to scientize our food as if science is going to somehow make it better. That infant formula will somehow be better than breast milk. That dietary supplements are somehow going to take the place of what we would normally have gotten from food. And the reality is that's just absolute fantasy. Yeah. That your food matters more than anything you can do with respect to your health moment to moment. And your food is hugely influential in changing for a better, hopefully, way that your genes express themselves. Mm-hmm. Back when I was in medical school, we were told that our DNA was hardwired, that it pretty well described who and what we would be. And it was a one-way street, DNA to protein to physiology, basically. We now understand quite readily that the genes that we contain, our genome, our book of life, is influenced moment to moment by our specific lifestyle choices, most importantly food. That the food that we choose to consume dramatically modifies our gene expression, and that more than 70% of our genes that have a role to play in health and longevity are under our direct control based upon our food and lifestyle choices, including exercise and sleep and the emotional experiences that we choose to experience or not.
Yeah. So what do we do about this? Because my story, and a lot of my listeners are familiar with this, but when I went into the doctor in my early 20s, I was rapidly gaining weight, getting high blood pressure. My thyroid was crapping out, and had a lot of issues that were just completely unacceptable for someone who was my age. But
and looking to be healthy too, right?
I'm sorry?
And you were looking to be healthy.
Oh, yes. I was trying with all of my heart to be healthy. And it was really interesting because the things that I was doing, following my doctor's advice to be healthy, were in fact the things that were making me sick in a lot of these cases.
Well,
So
I understand that. And so then you learned that. And, the word doctor doesn't mean healer.
yeah,
The word doctor actually means teacher. And that's the mission here. The mission is to get out. And as I wrote in Grain Brain, that book is the essence of the most well-respected, peer-reviewed journal citations that are available as we have this conversation. So it's not to say, well, we should all be on a paleo kind of diet because that's what our genome evolved to accept. That's great. That's one absolute important leg of the stool. The second leg of the three-legged stool is that's where current science is in terms of its recommendation. And the third leg of that stool for me is what do I see in my clinical practice every single day in terms of making these changes in people's diets and then seeing the results. Seeing things like various illnesses and problems that have been affecting people for 10, 20, 30 years suddenly go away with nothing more than a simple dietary change. The other metric I use is social media. People go to my Facebook site, David Perlmutter, MD, and are writing these incredible stories of success, that they are cognitively improved, memory is better, that their joint pain is going away, their skin is improved. And by the way, losing 20, 30 pounds and not even trying based upon finally giving back to your body what it has been so desperate for all of these years.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I think a lot of people can relate to being in that position where they go into the doctor, things are falling apart, they're expecting a prescription. I remember when I was there, it was basically this conversation that was something like, well, I'm running 30 plus miles a week. I'm eating almost zero dietary cholesterol.
Right.
Yeah, super low fat diet. I'm basically starving myself. And they would kind of say, well, if you're putting on weight, your blood pressure is getting worse, your heart's getting worse, all of these numbers are bad. You're not doing it enough. You need to do more running. You need to eat less fat. You need to eat more carbs, more whole grains. And it was at one point, and it took literally my house burning down for me to kind of reevaluate my whole situation and what advice I was taking. But it occurred to me that that's absolute lunacy, what I was doing. And the fact that basically every time I went in there was another prescription or two that I was supposed to be filling out. And
it just breaks your heart, as a physician,
yeah,
to see what is the play of that recommendation. And what is really heart-wrenching is it's still being told to patients that, they're being told, you've just got to cut your dietary fat and keep cutting your dietary fat. I mean, I think Dr. Dean Ornish is a wonderful man, done some great work, but his diet doesn't make sense. In fact, there was a head-to-head comparison. There was a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association called the A to Z study. It was published in 2007. The A stood for Atkins, 2 traditional, O Ornish, and Z was Zone. And basically, the big outliers here were the Atkins diet on one side being very low carb and high fat, and the Ornish program on the other side being very low fat and high in carb. And this was an interventional trial in women, and it demonstrated that, in fact, those women eating more fat lost more weight, had a better lipid profile across the board, lower triglycerides, better ratios. And this was also confirmed in the New England Journal of Medicine in July of 2008 in a trial called Weight Loss with a Low Carbohydrate Mediterranean or Low Fat Diet. Across the board, who lost the most weight? Those people eating the most fat. Who kept off the most weight? Those people eating the most fat. Who had better insulin response? Who had better control of blood pressure? The people eating the most fat. Who had actually better lipid profiles across the board. Who had lower what's called C-reactive protein, lower markers of inflammation that relate not just to heart attack risk, but also to Alzheimer's risk. Those people ate high levels of fat and low levels of carbohydrate. In April of this year, published in the same journal, the New England Journal of Medicine, was a comparison interventional trial looking at the standard American diet compared to the Mediterranean diet, compared to the third group, which was the Mediterranean diet with a lot more fat added. And the endpoints of the trial, it's actually very interesting, were one of three endpoints. Either you had a stroke, a heart attack, or you were dead. And those are the endpoints. And what was published in the spring of 2013 was the fact that they had to stop the trial because the people eating the most fat had an incredible 30% reduction of the endpoints of stroke, heart attack, or death. They had to stop the trial because it wasn't fair to the people participating in the trial who were on the other two diets. They said, look, these results are so astounding. Here's what the results are. Those eating the most fat are improving, doing so much better. We can't ethically continue this study. So that's the science. And whether people's mainstream doctors want to embrace it or not, people tend to be down on what they are not up on. And, again, this is where our current level of science is in the field of nutritional influences on whole body health, and specifically as it relates to brain health. In the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, in January of 2012, there was a fascinating report published by the Mayo Clinic, very well respected. And they determined that those individuals consuming a high-carb diet had about an 89% increase for developing dementia. Those elderly individuals eating the most fat, the dreaded fat, had a 44% reduction in becoming demented.
Wow.
Those having the highest consumption of the dreaded saturated fat had about a 35% reduction in becoming demented. So when we recognize that saturated fat and total fat is so desperately important for the brain, it really turns upside down, literally, these recommendations that we've been hearing for so long, recommendations that were really codified in 1992 in terms of governmental recommendations, followed 2 years later by the American Heart Association and the American Diabetes Association, telling us cut out the fat and eat more carbs. And, the word bogus is not a scientific term, but to me, that's what comes to mind, because it's not, number one, what we've ever done historically, and that matters. And number two, it's not what the science is recommending. And these are the references that I've just quoted to you. This is our most well-respected literature that's telling us eat more fat and cut down on the brain-damaging, heart-damaging, immune-damaging, cancer risk increasing carbohydrates.
So, you're so eloquent and you know your stuff. Why don't people know this? I hear this so often from people who don't really, drink our Kool-Aid, who say, well, there's no science that supports, or I haven't seen science that supports a low-carb diet, paleo diet, ancestral diet, high-fat diet, or anything else like that. That's not what the science says. And that's what they say. How can they get away with saying that?
Oh, you can say whatever you want.
I guess that's true.
One of the places I look, my book is on Amazon, and there are comments listed on Amazon, and people say exactly that. Oh, the brain needs glucose, and the science is clear that you should be on a low-fat diet. Well, that's not what the science says. And This is the most well-respected peer-reviewed literature telling us that this matters a whole heck of a lot. A wonderful article appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine, August 8th, 2013, if you want to have people want to look it up. And it was a measurement of individuals came into the study. They measured their fasting blood sugar. They followed them over a number of years to determine who became demented. What's your fasting blood sugar? Who became demented? They found a perfect correlation between fasting blood sugar and risk for dementia. The higher the fasting blood sugar, the greater your risk for dementia. But what was astounding was the fact that there was already a substantial increased risk of dementia, even at blood sugar levels of like 105 and 110,
wow,
where your doctor is going to say, hey, that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. You're not diabetic. So these were blood sugar levels way below the diabetes range that are already correlated with risk for developing dementia. So I think that we have to ask ourselves, what is not normal in terms of what we tell our patients, and strive for what is normal? What is ideal? What is the best recommendation that we can make to our patients? And that has absolutely nothing to do with a blood pressure, a blood sugar of 100 to 105, 110. That isn't good enough. While that is normal, normal means average. That's nowhere near ideal. We've got to drive the blood sugar lower. Just this 2 months ago in October, in the journal Neurology, put out by the American Academy of Neurology. That's, the most well-respected neurology journal perhaps on the planet, was a fascinating article that demonstrated right off the bat, memory function is directly related to blood sugar levels. In other words, your memory function declines as your blood sugar rises. And these are low levels, again, 105, 110. And your memory center, your hippocampus, shrinks in direct proportion to your blood sugar, even at 105. Now, let me just go on because I want to finish the point here. As if
I'm having so much fun right now. Like, really.
A lot of people measure their average blood sugar by looking at a blood test called A1C or hemoglobin A1C. If you're diabetic, obviously you have your A1C measured every 3 or 4 months because your doctor will tell you that's an average blood sugar measurement, and indeed it is. But we've got to understand that there is a direct correlation between that A1C level and the annual rate at which your brain will shrink. The higher the A1C, the more rapidly your brain shrinks. And, you can talk about other body parts, but when it comes to your brain, size does matter. You don't want your brain to shrink. And therefore, you've got to control your A1C, the binding of sugar to this protein, hemoglobin. And whether you have diabetes or not, any doctor can order this A1C level. In my book, Grain Brain, on page 117 is a very interesting graph that demonstrates this exact correlation between the degree of annual brain shrinkage and your A1C. But what is so compelling is that even at an A1C level of like 5.8, where your doctor is going to say, hey, that's totally in the normal range, you're already in the second highest category for shrinkage of your brain.
Wow.
And again, that was published in the journal Neurology, one of the most well-respected peer-reviewed medical journals dealing with brain diseases. So, there's no quick fix for this. There's no drug to fix your brain shrinkage or to bring you back, your cognitive function when you're started to become forgetful. You walk into a room, you don't remember why, you can't find your keys, you don't remember your Wi-Fi code, and you're calling your children or your parents. That would be worse. But the point is, we kind of laugh those events off as being senior moments and being acceptable. And the reality is they are very serious. These events are harbingers to upcoming full-blown dementia. So it's not to be taken lightly. These things are reversible. You can grow back new brain cells in the brain's memory center called the hippocampus. And, and those techniques are non-pharmaceutical. And, I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point.
Can we talk about it right now?
Yeah,
because it's very clear that we're all, or most of us anyway, especially in America and countries that live like America, we're in trouble.
Listen, what I'm going to do while you talk for a second, I'm going to actually pull up that graph. And I'll
nice.
We'll see. I think I can find it. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. So we're in trouble. Hopefully we can get this message out as soon as possible, but I'm sure there's going to be some lag time. What do we do in the
graph?
Oh yeah, there. Oh my gosh. That does look like a perfect correlation right there. Look at that 3D graph.
Correlates annual brain shrinkage to the hemoglobin A1C.
Yeah.
That's a laboratory study that every doctor can perform. And it's as this came from the journal Neurology. I put it in my book, Grain Brain, because that's where we are in terms of current science.
Yeah.
So, but here's what's so darn empowering. You can reverse that process and you can grow back your hippocampus. You can regenerate your memory function And you can grow by growing back the cells in your hippocampus, a process called neurogenesis, which is occurring in you and me right this moment. If you're 80 years of age or 90 years of age, it's still happening. And you can enhance that process of the regrowth of brain cells by getting aerobic exercise and taking a nutritional supplement that has in it the omega-3 called DHA. To be clear, I didn't say DHEA. I'm talking about DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. And if you choose not to take it as a supplement, then you'll eat wild fish, fatty fish, not farm raised. And that triggers your DNA to make a chemical that will then turn on the growth of brain cells. And that's pretty darn exciting.
So does that make you smarter? What does that do?
Well, I'm not sure, we have to define smart.
Right.
What has been demonstrated in the Scandinavian literature, actually, no, I was a study from the University of Pittsburgh, to do is actually regrow the hippocampus. Three things were studied in the one particular study that I mentioned. And number one was it increased the level of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is the growth hormone for the brain. This is just from exercise, by the way. Number two, it improved memory function in 1 year. And number three, it led to an increased size of the hippocampus as measured on a special type of MRI scan. These individuals who participated in the trial, they had a brain MRI scan at the beginning of the trial. One group was told to stretch each day. The other group was given aerobic exercise. The group that stretched, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with yoga and stretching. It's wonderful. But the group that did not do aerobics and simply stretched had a decline in memory function, had shrinkage of their brain's memory center, which is kind of typical, as opposed to the group that did the aerobics in which memory function actually improved and the hippocampus increased in size. We're all under this notion that we get our, whatever that finite number of brain cells is by the time we are 18 or 19 of 100 billion. And that from that point on,
that wasn't my peak.
Yeah. And then, every time you drink a beer, well, that's 20,000 brain cells and you're just on the skids. The reality is you don't have to accept that. You can turn that around and grow back new brain cells. So you can expand your memory function and actually strengthen your brain's memory center, the hippocampus, by taking some DHA and exercising aerobically. Who knew? I think that's very, very empowering. And again, that's the mission here. That's your mission. And that's why we're doing this. It's simply to give out this information. There's nothing proprietary about what it is that I'm saying. No one owns it. The knowledge isn't quite ubiquitous. It's you ask why nobody talks about this, because it's precisely for that reason that no one can own it, no one can put a patent on it, and therefore it's not going to be advertised on the evening news.
Yeah. I was just talking to someone about this on an interview earlier today about how if you could put fasting in a pill, it would sell like hotcakes. It would take over the world.
Well, no question. And some of the things that fasting does for human physiology is actually available to us. We know that certain nutritional supplements do, in fact, activate certain gene pathways that are similar to what are activated when we fast. Things like turmeric and resveratrol, DHA, and aerobic exercise mimic the effect of fasting in terms of the mitochondrial response and in terms of acting epigenetically, in other words, modifying gene expression.
Yeah. And it's so cool, but it's quite a quandary when it comes to getting your message out there, because if you follow the money and you come back to fasting, not many people are going to be throwing loads of money at something that says, consume no products and you'll do better.
Really? But, the message here is, give your genome what it has always gotten. Abel, your genome, my genome has not really changed in about 50 to 70,000 years. And suddenly the only thing that has changed are the epigenetic factors, how we influence the expression of our DNA. And that has changed a whole heck of a lot. And there's no mystery why, for the first time in history, our children's generation's longevity is less than ours. For the first time in history, we've now reached the top of the curve, and now longevity predicted for our children is going to be less than ours.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very scary proposition, number one. And to me, it says that we've really done a disservice to the next generation by not giving them what they've desperately needed.
It's heartbreaking, but I think to your point earlier, it's not hopeless. You can reverse a lot of the problems.
The mission here is let's light the single candle and draw to that single candle those who are interested, as opposed to cursing the darkness. I must say, from time to time, you have to kind of curse the darkness a little bit in terms of what people are told to eat and these governmental recommendations about how people should choose their foods. I'm not saying cursing the darkness, but it's wrong. It always reminds me of the movie, The Poseidon Adventure. Remember the cruise ship flips over and then Gene Hackman and his pals tell everybody, no, we've got to go up, because that little boy says, no, we got to go up, Captain. And to get to the top of the boat, which is now it was the bottom of the boat, because then that's where they're going to rescue them. And Gene Hackman is a minister, and he's telling everybody, you're going the wrong way. Please come this way. This is your way to salvation. I mean, there's a bit of a religious overtone there, obviously. Sure. But these people say, no, my doctor said to cut back on dietary fats, and they go straight to the bottom and they perish. I mean, that's a bit of a drama there. But I think it really serves to very well characterize my sense as to what is happening to people who do not get this message and are maintaining a diet that is so maladaptive to our genome.
Yeah. Can we talk about that in a little more specificity? Because I get a lot of questions about, are you advocating to be in ketosis all of the time, or are you saying we should be fat adapted or keto adapted and not necessarily in ketosis?
Keto adapted, fat adapted is really the extreme of what it is I'm talking about. And I think in an ideal situation, that's a terrific place to be. Now, I fully recognize that most of the individuals who are following the program we outline in Grain Brain are not going to be that fully adapted to the program or following of the program. And that said, though, to make them more ketotic than they were, and in fact, you can measure your degree of ketosis by buying a product called Keto Sticks. It's not a prescription. It's basically a stick, and you put a drop of urine on it, and then you measure it against the scale to determine how much your body is burning fat. So you get to a low level of ketosis, which is a wonderful place to be. It's really, as Gary Taubes has told us in Why We Get Fat, that's in his book, and What to Do About It. It's really what he believes is kind of the nature of humans. It was also spoken about in Nora Gedgaudas' book called Primal Body, Primal Mind.
Yeah, great.
Primal Mind, Primal Body.
Yeah, Gary and Nora have both been on the show in past months.
And they're speaking the truth. And again, they both talk about this low level of ketosis, which really should be considered a normal situation for humans. If you don't eat after dinner and go to sleep, when you wake up in the morning, you do have a small degree already of ketosis. It's a great place to be. And, with our patients, I still practice medicine all the time, 5 days a week, seeing, patients all day long.
Yeah. 5 days a week. Wow.
Well, that's what I do.
Yeah.
When I'm not doing this with you.
Right. When you're not writing #1 New York Times bestsellers, that's what you do.
I do that on the weekends. Thank goodness for coffee. But that said, the idea that, this mild level of ketosis is physiologic. And when people begin to experience that, they get back to a cognitive state, a clarity state mentally that they haven't experienced for decades, because all of a sudden they're powering their brain with ketones and less carbohydrate, and they experience clarity once again. And for many, it's absolutely an epiphany.
So would you describe it more as binary or a sliding scale?
Well, I always say that halfway measures work halfway. And in an ideal world, it would be binary. And to explain, Abel, for the viewers, meaning all or none, basically, 0 or 1 in the code. But I would say that no one's going to be perfect, you and I, I'm sure included. But the more of this that you follow, the less carbohydrates that you consume, the more you favor eating higher good fat foods like eggs, for example, and grass-fed beef, but mostly concentrating on vegetables. This isn't a strongly meat-based program, what I am advocating. It is meat when you can get it, that's grass-fed, or wild fish that hasn't been farm-raised, maybe free-range poultry. But by and large, those are considered the side dishes. Those are not the big story here. The big story on the plate are lots of wonderful above ground vegetables, kale, broccoli, the cruciferous vegetables, spinach. All of those wonderful, colorful vegetables should fill the plate, and the animal protein part of that is the garnish, not the main event. You know, when you go to a restaurant, they say, you're going to have the fish, or you're going to have the chicken or the steak. Which one? Well, I'm going to have a plate full of vegetables, and maybe I'll have a piece of one of those three choices on the side. And you know, it brings up the notion of eggs. There's some really new and exciting research on eggs that's just been released, and maybe your viewers are going to be the first to hear it. Eggs have been found to contain a new chemical, which is a brain antioxidant. It's this incredibly important chemical that actually serves as the component from which your body makes vitamin D and all the sex hormones and cortisol, and that chemical is called cholesterol. So this is a wonderful thing that eggs contain that is life-giving. It's brain supportive.
I thought it was heart-stopping. Now hold on a second.
Not at all. I mean, your body, your heart especially.
Yeah.
Look, we've made cholesterol. Every cell in the human body's made cholesterol for millions of years. So if cholesterol is bad, then either God or Mother Nature got it wrong, no matter or both. You could say whatever you like. That every cell in your body is making this wonderful life supportive chemical, and now in the last millisecond of our time on this planet, we're told there's something bad about it.
Now it's poison. Yeah.
Now it's poison. So, you know, when I do vitamin D levels on my patients, and so often these vitamin D levels are in the gutter, you know, levels like 15, 17. And you couple that with the idea that people are taking, I know this is hard to imagine, but taking medicines to get rid of the substance by which your body produces vitamin D, in other words, statin medications that lower cholesterol, then it's no wonder that the vitamin D levels are so low. Vitamin D low being correlated to risk for Parkinson's disease, found to be low in multiple sclerosis, found to be dramatically low in Alzheimer's disease. You know, this vitamin D story is just beginning. We were told, yeah, you need vitamin D to make strong, healthy bones. End of story. And nothing could be further from the truth. Vitamin D isn't even a vitamin by definition. It's a steroid hormone and activates more than 930 genes in human physiology, most of which actually reside in the brain. It's powerfully anti-inflammatory. It is powerfully antioxidant. And so it plays so many roles that it's not surprising that we see that low levels are associated with any number of issues that you can imagine. Why is vitamin D so low? Well, because two reasons. It's made from exposure to sunlight, and generally most people are wearing clothing when they go out for a walk these days. And number two, it's made from cholesterol, and everybody's so dramatic in terms of wanting to lower their cholesterol. Nothing is worse for human physiology. We need cholesterol. Those elderly individuals with the highest level of cholesterol have about a 70% risk reduction for developing dementia. And about a 45% risk reduction for dying each year. So we've got to rethink the cholesterol idea. Those adults with the lowest cholesterol have a dramatic increased risk for suicide, depression, cognitive issues like memory dysfunction and dementia. So we've got to change the narrative here.
I can personally attest that eating the way my doctor's diet, I guess, a few years ago, I definitely experienced a lot of that. It's like emptiness feeling emotionally almost. It's a breakdown of strength in who you are and willpower in a lot of cases. As soon as you switch over to eating loads of fat, though, it's amazing. It's hard to describe, but it's a balanced feeling. It's almost a confidence.
No doubt. I mean, and what you're doing is you're getting your DNA back to where it wanted to be in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so many people I don't think have experienced that. How good it can feel when you are fueling with fat. It's shocking.
No doubt. But again, the cornerstone of those things that we dread the most is inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
And a diet that's higher in fat and lower in carbs is the perfect diet to reduce inflammation.
Mm-hmm. And so you talked about vitamin D earlier. We've been getting a lot of questions, especially given the season, of what an effective supplementation plan would be for most people. What do you recommend?
Well, what I recommend is no specific dosage,
Mm-hmm.
because, people say, well, I have a great story. I mean, I told a woman that she needed to take 5,000 or 10,000 units of vitamin D a day. And her doctor said, no, you can't do that. That's way too much vitamin D. So she came back to me and I put her on 5,000 units of vitamin D a day. And she went back to her doctor, and he, again, an endocrinologist, had a conniption, if that's a real word.
Mm.
And is that a real word, conniption? Anyway.
It is now.
He said, look, you need to stop 5,000 units of vitamin D a day. I don't know what Dr. Perlmutter was thinking. And he wrote her a prescription for a pharmaceutical vitamin D once a week, 50,000 units. And I said, he gave you 50,000 units a week. I gave you 5,000 units a day. Let's do the math. 5,000 units times 7 days, that's 35,000 units. Turns out he's giving you more and criticizing me for giving you 5,000 units a day. That said, the bottom line of vitamin D is there is no magic, wonderful, ideal dosage. It is absolutely irrelevant.
Yeah.
Some people may need 15,000 units a day, and some people can get by with 1,000 units a day. Depends on heredity, sunlight exposure, levels of cholesterol, a variety of, and obviously body fat has a huge role to play in terms of maintaining vitamin D levels. More body fat allows you to compromises your ability to convert sunlight into vitamin D and even store vitamin D. So, which seems paradoxical for a couple of reasons. You think having more surface area, if your body is like a solar panel and you had more surface area exposed to the sun, you'd make more vitamin D. It doesn't work that way. But here's what does matter. Here's the fundamental on the vitamin D story. And that is, in recognizing that we're all different, we should be performing blood tests to measure vitamin D levels in everybody and get people to an ideal level of vitamin D, not in the normal range. Let me explain. The normal range of vitamin D is between 30 and 100 nanograms per milliliter. So that many doctors will tell their patient, well, 30 to 100 is the normal range. So you're at 35, that's totally fine. I'll see you later. But that's the normal range. But the normal range is what is considered average. And normal and average are not terms that I want to use for individuals who are following our program.
Right.
I like terms like ideal or optimal.
Yeah.
So if you want to optimize your vitamin D, you'll want to target getting it up to a level of 70 or 80, still in the acceptable normal range, but well in the range of being much more what your body can really use to augment gene expression. Vitamin D, to some degree, also plays a role in gene expression. So I think, this has not been the short answer, but the long answer then to the question is, there is no ideal recommended dosage. I usually start people at 5,000 units a day, an adult, and then we work from there, go up or down, following the blood test. And, that's one of the things I covered on the PBS special is, this is how to do it. This is what you need to be asking your doctor to check, a vitamin D level. And it's so compelling to me that oftentimes doctors will say, no, you're taking too much, and I'm not going to check your level because you're just taking too much, and I don't know what your other doctor was thinking. That's why we have blood tests readily available in any doctor's office to look at your vitamin D level. It's that fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely. We're coming up on time really quickly. We've been burning through this, having way too much fun.
So far.
Well, I would be irresponsible if I didn't ask you this, because this is something that's very close to my heart. It's what I studied in college, wrote my first book about it. What is the effect? You're a musician. You've been playing since, I believe you said 7 years old, playing guitar.
Right.
What is the effect of music on the brain? I'm sure you have some opinions on that.
Well, I do. In fact, I wrote a book about that too, oddly enough. And
I didn't realize that. Cool. I'll check that out.
No, it was in my book called Raise a Smarter Child by Kindergarten, because in that book, I was, obviously trying to give parents as much information as I could about what can they do for their children to enhance their abilities.
Right.
And it turns out that by starting children, it turned out to be the keyboard, but any music early on in life, that was associated with not only better math performance, but verbal performance and reading performance as well, especially if children learned this abstract notion of reading music. Mm-hmm. There's nothing intrinsic about notes on the score, on notes on a scale. But what they learn is that a note in one position on the scale represents a particular tone, and that a note higher on the scale is another tone that's actually higher. So that it develops early on in life the ability for what is called abstract thinking and symbolism, that a note on a piece of paper can symbolize a sound that you can then experience by touching a particular key on the piano. Why that's important is because there's nothing intrinsic about the difference between the number 6 and the number 19. They're images, but they do have symbolism. They symbolize quantity and magnitude. And then that child's able to grasp that abstract thinking early on in life. There's no real difference between the letter A and the letter Z in terms of, again, being scribbles on a piece of paper or on a computer screen. But their sounds and the implications for what can be formed with those abstract symbols is profound. So I'm all over this idea of music training early in life and continuing that throughout your lifetime. Yeah. So it's really very, very important because it augments your ability to connect seemingly disparate, from a functional perspective, parts of the brain. Those areas that deal with abstract thinking and visual imagery, connecting those areas to executive areas, and more complex areas, and even the auditory areas. What brain function and smartness is all about is not particularly your performance on a math test or English test, but being smart is a brain that's fully integrated, that is fully communicative with one part, with the next part, and then those concept connections being ingrained as what we call an engram, as a pattern that's then hopefully permanently put in the brain to use later on.
I'm having an irresponsible amount of fun right now. I really am. But we are out of time, unfortunately. But I had to bring that up because you're the first person, literally, I've interviewed who has a guitar behind you as I have a guitar behind me. But I love it. But as we sign off, could you tell folks where to find you and what exciting projects you're working on next?
Well, you can find me in Naples, Florida, but that's probably not the answer. Follow me on my website, which is drperlmutter.com, which is drperlmutter.com. Who knew? My Facebook site, I post there day in and day out with all kinds of interesting information, is David Perlmutter, MD, on Facebook. And my Twitter handle is at David Perlmutter. So those are great resources, I think, if you really want to stay up to speed. We try to keep that information as fresh and refreshed as possible.
Awesome. And Grain Brain is a #1 New York Times bestseller, an incredible book. If you guys haven't checked it out, I very much encourage you to do so. Dr. David, thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll have to jam again soon.
Thank you, Abel.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Fat Burning Man. If you liked it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, the podcast app, or wherever else you might be listening to or watching this show. Got a second? Please leave me a quick review on iTunes. I always love hearing from you, and if you think someone else might like and benefit from this free show, please take a second to share it with a friend or with a family member. You can get in touch with me on Twitter at Fat Burn Man, and Facebook by typing in Abel James or Fat Burning Man. Drop me a line anytime. Did you know that I've recorded over 150 episodes of Fat Burning Man, winning 4 awards in independent media and hitting #1 in more than 8 countries? And here's some more good news. You can download and listen to every single episode for free. All you have to do is type in fatburningman.com. I'll give you a second to type it in, fatburningman.com. And you'll get all the show notes in video and audio versions for all the past episodes of Fat Burning Man. Better yet, enter your best email at fatburningman.com, sign up for my newsletter, and I'll even send you a quick start guide to start burning fat right now and a few of our ridiculously tasty recipes as a special thanks for signing up. Once again, just go to fatburningman.com right now, enter your best email to get your free fat burning download straight to your inbox, and make sure that you never miss a show again. This is Abel James signing off. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week.